positive operations, normal operation. And we have a very small number of serious incidents and accidents in aviation. But if we are to look, in essence, how much understanding we have about this, we see a sort of a reversed image. We have a very vast understanding of serious incidents and accidents, typical to a safety one approach that I'm sure you are familiar with, a reactive approach in safety management systems that kind of allowed us over time to believe that if we understand what caused an event, we might have better chances to avoid having a similar event in the future. And we will see as we progress that perhaps nowadays it's not the ultimate approach into a safety management system when we need to compensate with something that comes from everyday normal operations. But if we look at the pyramid, inverse pyramid on the screen, we see that we don't have a very large understanding in relation to what entails normal operations and what actually goes well in the majority of the time in order for these events to be positive. And that's what we are trying to put forward with SECA. And we're going to show you how. Again, just as an exercise to understand the differences between everyday positive operations and serious incidents and accidents, we have here an actual depiction of the ratio of aircraft movements to incidents from a European NSP some 4 or 5 years ago. And the sliver that is darker on the screen, of course, represents the negative events. I'm sure we all agree this is almost insignificant in the big picture. However, as I was saying earlier, we have many support tools that are available in safety management systems to allow us to study this portion of events, to understand them, again, hoping that the better understanding we have, the more we are in the position to avoid having this kind of events occurring again. However, for everyday work, we have quite limited methodological resources that were specifically designed to support us in understanding what goes right. And this is how the discussion started, let's say, when we were putting together the materials for the course we're giving in Luxembourg with this image. And then we started to discuss that maybe the best and the most accurate version of it would look something like this. Because there's always something building in the background. There's always something accumulating that is not obvious enough. And we all know that big things have small beginnings. And the whole point of SECA and of weak signals is to allow us to do something with that information in the background before it becomes obvious. For the obvious things, as we've already discussed, and I'm sure you know, we have standardized approaches that allow us to measure them, to work with them, to monitor them. And now we propose something that allows us to pick on this background noise. Why? Well, if we are to go back to the beginnings of weak signals, when discussing about strategic management, Igor Antsov was basically saying that it's time to consider to develop a concept that goes, let's say, on the next level of strategic planning, because strategic planning required strong signals, information that is specific, that can be measurable, that is available early enough to create something specific. However, the conclusion that he was having at the time was that strategic planning was not prepared for surprises. And again, this is how, let's say, SECA would help us anticipate this kind of surprises and work with them before it can be too late, with the note that we don't talk only about adverse events. By working with weak signals and with the SECA approach, we envisage that we would also find positive details that could help us move forward, maybe reduce workload, improve effectiveness. So it's not just identification of bad signals that are weak, but also positive signals that can help us improve the work early on. If we are to look at the differences between weak signals and the strong signals, or the indicators that we are currently working with, the weak signals are in essence vague. I think this can kind of synthesize the way we look at them. They are seemingly random, they are disconnected, and they look to be ambiguous. They have low visibility, and this is very much in line with the working definitions that we have chosen in the development of the SECA method from Schumacher and Day and Blanco and Leska. And on the opposite side, we have the indicators that we are used to work with that are very clear, very bold. There are observable characteristics that are measurable. And of course, as I said earlier, we are quite trained to work with them nowadays. But they're quite different, and the method will allow us to put the pieces together, and our presentation hopefully will clarify how you can do that in order to make sense of these vague signals that are building in the background. More detail about this. They have various descriptors, but as I said, they have low visibility. They're difficult to recognize, and usually they would have to be tracked down next to other noises. Sometimes they can come in parallel with strong signals when we do investigations, for example, but by themselves, they don't really have meaning. They are quite ambiguous. They don't lead to the same interpretations. If various people were to look at the same situation, they might have a different interpretation. Again, it can equally be a threat or an opportunity to an organization, but there is no direct and specific link to safety in general. They are non-obvious. They have usually little familiarity. It's something you might hear on the corridors. It's something you might have considered at some point during your activities, but it's not strong enough for you to find a specific place to discuss about it. There is not a format or a strategy that allows you to put your finger on it and say, okay, this is what this would mean. Because again, as we said earlier, they're difficult to recognize to begin with. Apparently, they have low value. So sometimes people are putting them aside, thinking, yeah, this doesn't have anything to do with what we're discussing at this point in time. I don't know what to do with this kind of information, so it gets maybe discarded. It has low relevance. In the beginning, they don't support concrete actions, of course, in the operational context, and it's very interpretable. It has low reliability as well, difficult to differentiate between pieces of information, and it has low palpability. Again, in isolation, it's quite hard to understand what they refer to. However, I think it's very important, and that's why we emphasize so much, we don't work with them in isolation, because if we were to work with them in isolation, we will not have any kind of way forward. In image A, you see what a weak signal would be. Of course, it's noise in a vast, let's say, space. However, the way we envisage this as part of the SECA approach is to connect it with other pieces of information. And this is where I'm going to present the working definition that we have a seemingly random or disconnected piece of information that at first appears to be background noise, but that can be recognized as part of a significant pattern by viewing it through a different frame or connecting it with other pieces of information. So the whole strategy behind SECA is to allow us to put together a lot of data that slowly starts to build into something more visible, more strong, that allows us to have some actionable items based on the identification of the signals. And maybe this makes more sense to see how we go through all the steps. We start with the very random data. At the bottom of the pyramid, you see it's a lot of background noise that we don't know what to do with, but slowly, the more this information gets clustered together, the more clear the image becomes. And the idea is that we are doing a pattern identification from a very fragmented data all the way to collecting wisdom that allows us to actually have, as I said before, something actionable in an organization. And we will show you how this is a reiterative process that constantly allows us to add more data and to build further from, in essence, something that has no meaning to begin with. there was a need to turn data into knowledge because most organizations do not have a formal method to turn data into knowledge. And if they do have such methods, there is a lack of proactive methods existing, and they're mostly looking for things that go wrong. Again, very typical to a safety one approach. And behind the SECA methodology, and as I said, we are compressing a lot of information in the short amount of time we have today. We have a lot of concepts that go behind, for example, systems thinking and the idea of safety two, and actually a combination of safety one and safety two. We are not promoting only a proactive approach into looking into safety. What we are promoting is the need to combine reactive methods with proactive methods in order to get the full picture of what is going on. And indeed, without doing that, there is a lack of systemic view. You see only one side of the picture, the obvious one, but there's so much more going on in the background that we can work with already at this stage. And without continuing so, we don't really get to look at how people actually do their work. And Ricardo will tackle this a little bit more in detail later. Perhaps you are familiar with the work proxies, work as done, work as imagined, and so on. So we are going to come back on this in a moment. How did this go in Eurocontrol? Well, towards the end of 2011, actually, Eurocontrol already started to discuss about weak signals. That was the part one phase that was built between 2011 to 2014. The project team at the time identified ways through which these ambiguous and hardly identifiable signals are not captured by traditional safety management system, but it was also put forward that this is actually the way through which operators usually do their work. This is what they rely on their everyday work. So it continued, it was refined between 2018 and 2021. Weak Signals Part 2 was aimed at defining a pragmatical approach, incorporating a lot of theoretical foundation from resilience engineering principles, systems thinking, as I was saying earlier, and that is how SECA came to be. From 2023 onwards, we have incorporated the knowledge we have on weak signals at our Aviation Learning Center from Eurocontrol that is in Luxembourg. We have courses that we are going to detail at the end of our webinar today in case you are interested to follow on this. And we have already started to see SECA operationally implemented. So we are moving along, and there's quite a lot of interest on the topic. And of course, we want to acknowledge the continuous support and the vision that Tony Lico from Eurocontrol has had from the very beginning, and who is continuously sponsoring the topic. So I think I'm going to transfer over to Ricardo to take you to the steps of SECA, and I'll maneuver from here, Ricardo. So I'll listen to you.
Thank you, Dana. I mean, that's a sort of a big project, and you see it from this picture where we're talking of something around 15 more years of work involving various universities, various partners, various practitioners, mainly in the aviation domain, and more specifically in air traffic control, air traffic management. But over time, it started to be a more domain neutral logic and approach, because it has been realized that the challenges we have been focusing on here were shared in various areas. So, maritime operation, hospitals, but even more in general, like usual business, like business and administrations. So we have been talking, and then I introduced already the idea of work process, and that's what this picture is about. It's about work process. You you may disagree with me, but there is something behind. I mean, besides some implicit interest in comics and some special superheroes here, we wanted to make this picture available because in the next slide, um, you realize that that single piece of paper is actually the envelope of few agents, few actors, few professionals working on it. So it's a joint system working on that single page, let's say. So we have an editor, writer, penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, all together creating what we look at. That's pretty straightforward, I would say. And in our mind, there is the same metaphor when we look at that from a work-related environment. And that distinction, which is in the next slide, is classified as work as prescribed versus work as done. A reference is there, but we know that there are many more varieties. Like for sure, we know that there is value in defining how the work is conducted in the real way. But at the same time, we know that that type of work is actually not accessible because there are several ways in which that work can be interpreted, can be disclosed. And in the next slide, we have another reference that tell us about that, about the so-called varieties of human work that Steve Shorrock has been talking about and writing about. And if you are more curious on semantical interpretation of that, you have another reference in the same slide. But the long story we want to summarize here is that every time there is a comic print available on your desk to be read, or every time there is an aircraft vectored in an airspace, or every time you do your work, actually that same thing um, can be represented, can be disclosed, can be analyzed, can be observed, can be simulated, instructed, measured, judged even, or imagined differently. And all those things bring value. The consciousness of understanding that there is no unique way to talk about work brings value in understanding the real performance of your system. The big problem here is that the majority of those varieties most of the time remain implicit or tacit if we want to be more formal. And in the next slide, we're going to echo a bit what Dana says about weak and strong signals. The type of signals we are used to most of the time are explicit. But if we want to make it very systemic, the way we look at our system, we need to challenge ourselves and accept that there is value in what remains tacit or implicit, which means that is something that is very it's sometimes subjective, sometimes it's learned through experience, it's created dynamically, it's internalized, like it belongs to the mental model of the owner of that variety. But even though it is hard to document and hard to transfer or learn or teach, generates value in the long term. So it's something that generates a return on investment if you have the right mindset and at some point the right tool. So that was more or less the complements, the complementary background to what Dan already introduced. And that's where we set the basis by a white paper, which you see in the next slide. Now it's a relatively vintage white paper, is a 2022 white paper, which summarized and one of the streams of the weak signals research project, but it's still absolutely valuable because in that paper we try to formalize um, the way you can look at a system, the way you can look at this tacit knowledge that is hard to capture, moving from disconnected data, understanding relations among them, and understanding patterns afterwards. I suspect that many of you may have been listening to other webinars hosted by Ohio State University and you may have the same interest and passion we have about understanding patterns in work system, and that is what this approach is about. Like our patterns are knowledge patterns, so ways in which the system can be understood and dots can be connected. Complementary to that, there is a this white paper is for your reference available as open access in Skyberry, which is Eurocontrol repository. There is a very recently published article which underwent a sort of longer academic peer review scientific process, which you can see in the next slide, and describes the more like conceptual and theoretical ways in which we look for those patterns and try to find a logic and um, an ontology for them in the context of adaptive systems. We're keeping this at high level, so we're not zooming into those details, but I'll update the link to access both papers shortly in the chat. So let's try to summarize what is the content of these two papers, the white paper by Eurocontrol and this paper published in Theoretical Issues in Ergonomic Science. In the next slide, we'll very quickly go through this one, and to save time, we'll jump directly to the SECA logic. So we are imagining work as a dynamic evolution of several knowledge conversion phases. The first one is socialization. You see in the top left corner where tacit knowledge is changed, is converted to another tacit knowledge. What does it mean in practice? It means that during everyday work, you are updating your mental model based on what you see, based on how you look at the others, based in like experiencing what happens around you. So your tacit knowledge in how the work is done is continuously updated, looking at how the work is done itself. What we try to do is that tacit knowledge should at some point be made explicit, and that's the purpose of the second phase, the externalization. This happens during the SECA interviews. You see a small image on the top right corner. That's the structure of the interview protocol that SECA is about. So externalization means that some of those tacit, otherwise unavailable knowledge becomes explicit, so you can finally touch it. You can finally look at that, explore it. And imagine that as one story, one person telling you something that is otherwise explicit. In the next phase, that is combined into other explicit varieties. So it means that the combination phase, which you don't see on the screen as a word, but is the bottom right corner, is explicit knowledge made explicit, further explicit, meaning that you are combining, that's why it's called combination, combining multiple stories, multiple varieties, multiple uh, fragments of work, and that's the moment where you start creating possibly some patterns. In our investigation, we plan to do that like not only from a human perspective, but a sort of human automation, human AI specifically analysis with all threats and positive aspects you may be interested about. Ultimately, that explicit knowledge will be internalized if the approach works, because it implies that others may update their mental model and create more tacit knowledge into that. There is a spiral in the middle because this cycle goes back and forth all the time. It happens even as we speak. Your tacit knowledge about SECA is updating because we are externalizing something, and our two perspectives, Dana's and mine, are combined in your head, and at some point, we hope, will be internalized, and from tomorrow, your tacit knowledge about weak signals and SECA will be a bit wider than it was yesterday. Going very quickly, maybe Dana, we want to jump in slide 24. Yeah, so yes, here. This is taken from the paper we mentioned before, but for those of you more acquainted with the patterns language, we're talking about a sort of um, combination again of two ways to play with patterns, an idea of finding patterns and an idea of priming patterns, existing from a catalog of pre-existing, pre-identified patterns. It is called WAX catalog because it's the work as X variety. You know, if you assume that there is a list of work as X, you are like work as instructed, work as imagined, work as prescribed varieties. You can always compare the way a story is framed to one of those, and then look for an archetype priming your story out of that. But then you have the real story, how things emerge, which cannot replicate, maybe doesn't replicate any of the things that have been stated before, and that's the idea of finding emergence behavior, finding patterns. All of that is available because there is an externalization function that is continuously fed by further internalization activities once you know more about the patterns you'll be looking at. I promise I didn't go very theoretical, and that's it. That's the maximum depth we want to investigate, open to any questions afterwards, but that's in essence in one picture how the approach works. You see in the middle of the boxes for balls, for areas, which in the next slide actually will be, thanks Dana, will be clarified. And those are the areas around which SECA aims to elicit otherwise tacit knowledge. So something about context, something about responses, something about pressures, and something about conflicts. So very briefly again, context in a sense of understanding what is the situation. Responses is the core of it. So understanding the various work varieties in terms of personal response. So something like very close to the work is done, we could say is the disclosed variety of work is done, what procedure says, so the work is prescribed, and other varieties linked to usual behaviors or experience-related behaviors. This is triggered by pressures wherever relevant, management, outside work, colleagues, and generate some goal conflicts, which as an operator, as someone working in that domain, you need to trade off to decide what actions to take. Very simple example in the next slide is about context. That's quite quite central here, meaning that we are talking about context that is not incident related. So the way to frame it as an incident, related approach was somehow the hook we had, or we started from back in time, but realized moving more forward that this is more about adaptive capacity, adaptive behaviors. So it goes pretty straightforward that this kind of investigation shall not be related to an incident. We have other ways to look at an incident. We want to understand what is otherwise tacit. And especially in aviation, there are several European or national regulation that oblige organization to report incidents. So that's not what we want because in many cases that reporting make knowledge already explicit and captured, often in a sort of bureaucratized way. Imagine this kind of semi-structured guide for an interview being more in the context of an informal talk. Some of our users refer to that as a cafeteria talk. Imagine that as a starting point for a discussion. So not really a safety related or compliance related investigation. The entire protocol for the analysis is available in the white paper I mentioned before. And for your reference, that has been constructed and built after a few years of testing and exploration with various users, various practitioners, mainly in aviation, but also linked to the domains I already talked about. So the questions are relatively generic and usable in the context you're working at. So this is about externalizing data. We want to combine them, as we mentioned before. So the next slide shows you the process. You start from transcript of interviews, you code them, qualitative coding. We are using grounded theory for a bunch of reasons. I'll keep it very short and say we don't have a taxonomy. We are talking about things that are tacit, so we don't know the explicit variety of them, so we cannot predefine categories for all the stories we have. We want to build this from the actual experiences. So that's why the grounded theory logic comes into play. Um, and, there's a seems to work because we are now asking people good questions, good in a sense of um, questions that allow them to explain the challenges they are facing, the pressure they're looking at, and we have the ability to analyze them. A very quick overview of the results will be more like a, you know, um, carousel of the next slides, I think. So if Dana, you don't mind moving to, yes, this one, it's about a sort of macro review. From the topic you look at, you can look at from the interviews you get, you can look at the main topics emerging from your um, um, units. In this case, is all anonymized and pretty simplified. So you see one unit is more focused on traffic, another one more on training. For whatever reason, it could be negative stories or even positive stories. And that's the case actually when we look at this data. So some people were really emphasizing the challenges they faced during high traffic conditions. That's unit alpha, more concerned with that. Unit Bravo, no big concern about traffic, but actually big shout out on the way training was delivered and executed. So it was more like reinforcing the way training is delivered as a positive pattern, as an adaptive pattern that generates success afterwards. Macro review, in the next slide, we have a glimpse on what we call the meso overview, like an intermediate level, because it's where we start coding. That's where we start using this inductive grounded theory coding. And, we can do all usual qualitative research activities for those of you who are familiar with that. For those of you who are not familiar with qualitative research, we are simply saying that now we have a list of codes that can be analyzed, can be counted, can be interconnected with other codes. And that's where out of this connection, out of this interconnection, we have patterns. In this case, very generically on purpose, we could have patterns about training, about coordination, about teamwork, which allows us then to go to the next slide that tells us a bit about the micro overview. Micro review in a sense of, really going to the text and saying, what does it mean that in practice? What is the implication for that? Where this story come from? And, that's again for very generic as a very generic reference for giving you an idea of what that pattern look like. This is the pattern that is generated inductively. In the next slide, very shortly again, we have the idea of priming patterns. And the idea comes from, finding ways, again, patterns. If you see each of the metrics that we're looking at, in which these answers can be organized. So, the two extremes, let's keep it at that level for this conversation. We have the chaotic case where essentially every work variety doesn't um, doesn't coincide with anyone else. So each one is doing their own. And on the other side is the extreme of what we call the anutopic congruence, where anyone is really doing the same and the procedure really say you to do so. So utopic in a sense of, in the messy reality of any work system, we very rarely find any of those congruents. That's a bit the story on the priming. The implementation goes, yeah, in the next slide, thanks, Dana, sorry. The implementation we had in mind, and not just in mind, we have organization using that at the moment. Start from a proof of concept where you have a very restricted number of people playing with that, up to, in the next animation, a larger, and I would say in itself is a complex adaptive system. Like, it's your organization finding a way to make it happen locally and scaling that at organizational level. So people train the people essentially to work on that. We mentioned a few type of users, master interviews, interviewee, champions. Actually, this is meant to be an operational exercise. In the next slide, we have roles we envision. There is a longer explanation um, in the course, but we'll introduce that later on. So there are type of experience that we expect to have in the implementation of SECA, which is matched to a technological solution, which is in the next slides, are again very briefly introduced, starting from forms, having a AI agent, framing copilots. Why copilots? Because for privacy and organizational restrictions, and then dashboards done in Microsoft Fabric, which allows the level of flexibility we want to envision. If that's okay for you, Dana, I will jump directly to slide 39. We have a few cases here, but given the time, we can keep that for a later conversation. And there is anyway reference in the white papers if you are curious, or please give us any question in the question and answer if you want to hear more about that. Um, the entire summary of this is that we are not really looking for root causes. That's not the words, the language, the aim of this initiative. We're more looking for understanding work, understanding how challenges are created, are managed, are emerging, and are generating other challenges. So I'll leave that to you, Dana, to close the next slide, if that's okay for you.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo. So yeah, we can move at the wrapping up part of the webinar with the key features. As we were seeing earlier, it's very important to remember the proactive focus on identifying weak signals before they become adverse events. If we talk about negative identifications, but also the feature of identifying and sustaining good working practices, because we also look at what goes well in the background. And SECA basically allows us to explore normal operations to uncover trade-offs and pressures, as Ricardo has shown you the structure of the interview, basically, at any level, be it at team level or at high level from an organizational perspective. From our perspective, as we have mentioned, we already start to see it in operation. We had already 11 courses with more than 100 participants from various industries, mostly aviation, but we've had colleagues from the medical industry, we've had colleagues from the maritime industry, and some exchanges even from the train industry and the nuclear one. We have 2 test cases in the hospital management, and of course, conversations are ongoing for other organizations. And if you want to learn more about it, you are more than welcome to check Learning Zone, where we have a catalog of courses offered by Eurocontrol. And these ones on weak signals are there as well. We have 2 modules. The first one is covering the theoretical foundations, and the next one is looking into how to practically implement this in an organization and to understand a little bit more of the technicalities behind the tool. So of course you can contact us at any time for more information. And with this, we are wrapping up our part, and we're more than happy to answer any questions you might have. So I'll stop sharing now.
So I want to be the first to thank you for the fantastic presentation, covering lots of bases. You'd cover quite a lot in those 42 minutes. I just want to remind everybody the question and answer is open for business. I'm also checking out the chat, but we don't have anybody in the Q&A just yet, so I will fill in for the moment. My first question, I think, is more for you, Dana, but please, Ricardo, jump in as well. You said there are a number of pilots going on. Is there any, are any of them far enough along that you're already getting news back? Like how is it going there? Like whatever you're willing or able to share, how are those things going? What's working? What lessons learned do you already have?
Yes, absolutely. So we are already going ahead, and we collect feedback from the users that are implementing this already regularly, and we try to fine tune the way they work with the process, but also on our side, if we can help them, I don't know, work on the buildup of their taxonomy slowly, because as Ricardo said, we are starting with no taxonomy based on the grounded theory, but then eventually things start to make more sense. So we work closely with the data analyst, and maybe Ricardo will detail on that a bit later. But we certainly see traction on it. I think the most interesting part from our side is to continue to offer our support outside of the courses, because one size does not fit all, for sure. This is, I think, the main message we're having so far. From an implementation strategy point of view, it really has to be fine-tuned in order to make sure that it meets the needs of the organization, because especially given the content of the course and the proactive approach, I think the implementation is very much linked to the culture that organization has, and you need to find the best way through which you introduce this to the people, what use cases maybe you show them. So we help organizations build this narrative, and we support them to see how the interviews are going. So we have sometimes regular discussions because interviewers might still have some questions themselves. They realize as the process goes along that some things are not clear. So we fine tune the way they do the interviews, and then also with the data analyst to see how to give more meaning to the data and how to work with the chatbot. And maybe Ricardo wants to add on that as well.
Yeah, I think the is not really a best practice, but what we experimented working best for real implementation in any of the organization is trialing that is the push from a sponsor, let's say, what we call a master, but not because this is a top-down exercise. It's actually a bottom-up exercise because people want to speak, want to talk about their challenges, want to talk about their pressure, and there has to be someone who is willing to listen. So that's the sponsor we're talking about. Like in the organizations where this is going on, there were absolutely no, counter pressure or no, challenge to sell this to operators. Actually, it was the other way around. As long as there were any chance for them to understand how the logic works, what was the scope of that, how it is disconnected from blame attribution or instant investigation of, even naming who is involved in any story, because this stays all like generic at that level. That was a automatic, like instantaneous selling point. I'm saying selling on purpose because very often we find very hard to explain the interest in doing safety beyond pure compliance-based analysis. And that's why I'm using selling, because if you want to make this happen, if you are convinced that safety is guaranteed by compliance for certain reasons, I'm not saying we should abandon that, but if you are convinced that safety is a bit beyond that, you need to find a way to make sure that this is sold to people who make a decision and invest. Maybe not in the next checklist, but wants to invest a bit in understanding what are the challenges that make a checklist hard to follow. So that's the best practice I would advise. So making sure that there is someone who wants to listen, because the next phases will go very, very easily. Technically, there are some best practices, but this is about, again, having the consciousness of, let me say it, accepting being uncomfortable. because if you want to be comfortable, you already have your bureaucratized reporting system where you look for human error, and you will find human error if you look for that. So here you're looking for an answer you don't know yet. So you're not looking for, oh, that's a mistake, that's a lapse, that's a slip. Yeah, could be, very rarely, but when you start listening to people, you understand that the challenges lie somewhere else. And you most of the time there is no way to make that visible and tangible. That's why this weak signal comes well.
Excellent. Our audience is still incredibly shy, or the Q&A thing is broken. So I would again invite anyone to either unmute and just come out, ask a question, raise your hand. I can find you. While you're doing that, though, I'm happy to hoard these, to answer my questions as well. I have lots of them. But just so you know, I'll ask the next one, but please, actually, I'm gonna shut up for just a second so that someone has more space to be able to again either unmute or throw something in the Q&A or put something in the chat. But I'm not going to wait for very long.
Perhaps we've been so clear.
So clear.
It's not broken.
Okay. If somebody, Miriam Balcom raised her hand. So Miriam, if you please come off of mute, or you can type your question in. The floor is yours. Oh, there you go. So you should be.
How do
Yep.
I unmute?
Yep, you're there. You're there. We hear you.
So sorry. Yes, thank you. This is a very interesting presentation. So thank you for sharing this incredible work with us. I know that you all spent some quality time together last summer in Rome, and I was wondering if you could maybe share an interesting discussion that you had, perhaps relating to SECA and SCAD, or any sort of like rich insights that you had while you were together. I'd be interested to know.
So just for the rest of the audience, just to clarify, Dana did not join us in Rome while I was in Rome over the summer. I did not meet her until this morning. Ricardo, anything? I was going to ask a SCAD SECA kind of proactive safety question as well. Anything you would like to talk about, just in general, how either how those conversations went, or how kind of this fits into the bigger conversations we've been having about proactive safety?
I think that there is a common background, and that is definitely linked to the idea of patterns. The way patterns can be elicited through SECA or SCAD, I think, is somehow complementary. Maybe I wouldn't say you're gonna get the exact same logic, but there is similarity into that. So to answer Miriam, I think the end results may look different, like the way you are looking for patterns, because what SECA was designed, I mean, the aim of SECA was to design something that was more like a practitioners oriented, let's say, so usable in daily routines even. So it was conceived with some simplification, I have to admit, but was conceived to allow a reproducible, scalable logic. And that's why also the idea of computer-assisted coding and the idea of priming patterns out of an existing matrix, let's say, matrix combinations. I think that's the difference from my understanding. Like maybe the view on the design of the tool has been from the very beginning to have something that an organization like the ones we're working on at the moment can ultimately use on their own in a sort of scalable way. But I'll leave that to you, Mike, because I'm sure you have other ideas and comments.
I always have other ideas. I will keep them short though, because now we have not one but two additional questions for you all. Again, I'll keep it short, but this could certainly be another topic of conversation for our webinars. I think SECA, from what I understand, I don't know everything about it, but I have done a pretty deep dive with Ricardo. Um, the purpose of that, and I think I would hazard to say, most to all of the proactive safety tools is to try to break through these difficulties of not only, weak signals is a great example. Systems hide systems hide their details from us in a bunch of different ways. And I think, and I'll just speak for SCAD for a moment. It was safety, this conglomeration of ideas that we have lumped into safety two, which is really important. I think it led a bunch of practitioners to go out and say, "Oh, well, I won't ask just what went wrong. I'll ask what went right." And those folks, those very earnest practitioners that went out and did that, they got nothing back typically. Like, well, what do you mean what went right? Everything, what are you crazy? Like, and so part of each of these tools is how do you break through and SECA, and I was going to ask this question of you all as well. Um, this idea of what is remarkable as one of your kind of intro questions, or maybe the major intro questions, I think is really interesting, which is slightly different than SCAD, which is what was different than textbook. Well, maybe that is the same. Remarkable and different than textbook. Maybe that's the same. But certainly different than safety one, which is about outcome, a bad outcome. Tell me about something that ended in a bad outcome. So I think, that ability to broaden, I think, is a big deal. And I think the other thing that we've all realized is we're just scratching the surface, and this ability to scale. SECA has gone much further than SCAD. I have some ideas on that, and and I'd love to actually connect with both of you to talk about that, or all three of you now that Miriam's in this circle, about how to go further with this. But the idea of where can the machine, where can the AI, where can it assist, and where can we bring in the people? I think that's a really important piece. So I see. These tools are definitely kindred spirits. Perhaps not surprisingly, they both were generated out of the Eurocontrol Weak Signals program. So I look forward to more of that. I'm going to at least try to get one more question in. Anthony Smoker asks, can you share with us, first he said, thank you for the meaningful presentation. Can you share with us from the application of SECA thus far, the nature of the interventions that have emerged? What kinds of interventions have been influenced by this? And were they influenced by scale, by the scaling of this?
Thank you, Anthony. Indeed, I have to say that in terms of interventions, we are not closely following with the ANSP, as this is like internal cuisine. We're mostly ensuring that the conversation is starting in an appropriate way, and we help them understand the process. And as soon as things start to move on, it's kind of like, as I said, internal cuisine. It's something we are meaning to go back and maybe bring more of the findings into the course itself to give more examples to those who want to start integrating SECA. So personally, I cannot say if they were of a big influence so far or not, because we don't have that data specifically in terms of outcome. We have the data that we work on with them, but what they did with the data in the organization at this point in time, I cannot really give you a great answers so far. So we're looking forward to connect and to find out more as well.
Maybe the informal conversation we have access to in that regard is that it triggers more questions. So I think that's the only valuable point we wanted to have, at least at that level, because the more questions I'm talking about is essentially it trigger the idea to, oh, then there is something to look at here. Let's have a debriefing. Let's have a toolbox meeting about understanding why these outcomes in this unit feel that to be a challenge for them. And that's the type of intervention we can refer to. We don't have, as Dana mentioned, like the specific type of conversation, the specific procedure which was challenging that we can refer to. But I hope this somehow clarifies the idea of the type of intervention, the nature of intervention we've been talking about.
And in any sense, Anthony, no matter what the data would show, we always advise for them to go a step forward. So either to organize workshops on specific hotspots that became so clear that there is a specific category of topics that you want to cover, either as Ricardo was saying, in specific targeted discussions, but there needs to be a step forward. There needs to be an intervention of sort for them to define what that is more meaningful at the time. But just looking at the data is not enough. It's a continuous process. And then, of course, you start all over again. And every so many months, or every month, every 3 months, you reanalyze the data and you start from scratch.
So we have two other additional questions, and we are out of time. We are out of time. What I would suggest, so one of the questions though is where do I get started, and do you have any guidance on how to get started? You know, so I see Ricardo, you're going after that one. I guess my bigger question though is if folks want to connect with you on how to get started, are you open to that?
Absolutely.
Excellent. And the other question is around the higher prevalence of AI and human agent teams and joint cognitive systems, you know, incorporating higher automation. Again, I probably can't get into that, but Victor, that is certainly something that RAPSI is going to be tackling, and hopefully with both Ricardo and Dana. So please stay tuned to that in future webinars as well. And I would love to connect with you individually on how we're doing it as well. But sadly, that is the end of our time together. And I know we could have filled another hour or 2 hours or 6 hours, but especially with us, it's only 1 p.m. here in the United States. You all don't have anything to do, right? I'll keep it there. Thank you so much for giving your time and giving your expertise here. We really appreciate this. And for everybody else out there, we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.